Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the museum today. This is, of course, our Chats on the Past program, where we go through and discuss history with scholars, authors, historians, and artisans. As usual, my name is Nicole Carpenter. I'm the assistant director here at the museum. If you have any questions during today's program, please enter them into the chat. We would love to hear your questions. As always, we are very excited to present this program for a very low fee. It is free for our members as well. We do, of course, always appreciate any support that you can give us, especially as we are not funded by the town of Westport or the state of Connecticut. Coming up on the museum calendar, we have tomorrow evening a short film preview about Sigrid Schultz, World War II journalist and absolutely fascinating lady known as the Dragon from Chicago. So please do join us for that. On September 28th, we do have a exclusive hard hat tour of the Barnum Museum that has been closed since a tornado hit in 2012. And then also in October, once we get into the kind of spooky season, we do have our Monte Carlo night where we hope that you will come and join us for all kinds of gambling and, of course, charity gambling, but it should be a really great event. So please do join us for that. So today I am very happy to introduce and welcome to the museum Jared Stearns. Jared is originally from Boston, where he studied print journalism at Emerson College. He has written for the Boston Globe and the San Franciscan before publishing Pure, The Sexual Revolutions of Marilyn Chambers with Headpress in April of this year. So thank you so much for joining us, Jared.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. We are very pleased to have you with us. So at this point, we are going to dive into our presentation today. And again, please enter your questions as you have them through our presentation.
Sounds good. So we can go to the next slide. So today we're talking about Marilyn Chambers, who, for those of you who remember her when she was living in Westport, her name was Marilyn Briggs. And I wrote a book about her that, as Nicole mentioned, was published this year in April. It was actually published on her birthday, what would have been her 72nd birthday. And she is one of the more famous Westporters, but slightly controversial because of the area of entertainment for which she is best known, which is adult films. And I've spent 13 years researching her life and career and writing the book, which is authorized by her daughter, who's become a very dear friend of mine. And I spoke with, her longtime Westport friends, and as well as her brother and her sister. And it really tells a story. A lot of people just sort of say that she was a porn star. They kind of encapsulate her entire career under that label, and it's really disappointing when people do that, because what that tells me is that they don't really know much about her career. She did more mainstream stuff than X-rated stuff, but of course she'll always be known as a porn star because she was in a very famous X-rated film called Behind the Green Door in 1972. But she always loved Westport. And would return there for her high school reunions, and had family there for a long time, and she really, those were formative years for her, and so I'm happy to talk about her time in Westport today, I'm happy to talk today about her time in Westport, and also just give you a little bit more information about who she was as a person. When my agent and I sold this book, we wanted to sell it as, the story of a woman, an entertainer who happened to do adult films, not a book about a porn star. And it's an unflinching account, of who she was, as a person, as a wife and a mother, a daughter, a sister, and she was a human being. And a lot of people just kind of brush her aside because they don't happen to agree with some of the films she made because they contained sex. And I'm a New Englander. I get it. I was born and raised outside of Boston in Waltham, Massachusetts, and spent the first 23 years of my life there. So I get how puritanical it can be, despite how liberal-minded many people are. But I do later, would love to address some of that, I have personally experienced, just in the last 24 hours, about just some of the public commentary, and about who she was. But I encourage you to read the book. If you think people write books to become rich and famous, then you know nothing about the publishing industry, because they don't. But this is the first and will likely be the only authorized book about Marilyn Chambers, and it tells her entire life story. And for many people, she was, someone they knew, went to school with, and she was friendly with them. And I encourage you to read it because you'll probably learn more about her than you think you know. And a- and it's a fascinating story, and I wanted her story to be told because she contributed something substantive to American popular culture. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So we can go to the next slide. So she probably is Westport's most famous adult actress, but I want to talk a little bit about her time in Westport, and highlight some of her family time. I want to do a short reading, and also talk about her career highlights, which again extend beyond the X-rated realm, and then talk about controversy and her legacy, because she has a legacy. It's an important one. And I'd like to get into some of that, especially for those who might be watching or live or on demand, who again, sort of reduce her to this somewhat disparaging label. To the next slide. So she was actually born in Providence, Rhode Island, but she moved to Westport with her family when she was 6 months old, and then spent her life there until high school, when she moved to New York. But these are a couple pictures of her when she was a kid, obviously. On the left is her when she was about 3 years old, and on the right is when she was about four-ish, five-ish. And she was born in April of 1952, and she was born Marilyn Ann Briggs. Marilyn Briggs is how certainly most people in Westport remember her. They don't. Marilyn Chambers was a stage name, so Marilyn Chambers was the famous character, but Marilyn Briggs was the person behind that. And she Westport, she always remembered fondly as a place, almost idyllic, and almost bucolic in a way, that she grew up in a home with an older brother and sister, and a mother and father, and it was almost very, something right out of Leave It to Beaver or something like that. They were very kind people, and there might be some people who even remember her parents, um, viewing today. But she loved Westport, and if you want to move to the next slide, I could talk a little bit about her family. So this shot was most likely taken by her dad, who was William Briggs. And her mother, standing there on the left, was Virginia, who was known as Ginny. And her brother, who's a Westport legend in his own right, he was part of Barry and the Remains, Bill Briggs. I'm sure many people remember him. He just passed this year, so we want to remember him and honor him. And Marilyn's sister, Jan. So Bill and Jan were about 12, 13 months apart, and Marilyn was 6 years behind them. So they were really close, but by the time Marilyn was a teenager, both Bill and Jan were kind of out of the house. So she was left alone a lot, except for her close friends. Um, both of her parents worked. Her dad was an advertising executive and would take the train every day from Westport to New York City, like many um, guys of that era in the 50s and 60s. And women, in that era were sort of expected to stay home. Um, Ginny, was not that type of woman. She wanted to work. She wanted to be a doctor, but her father wouldn't allow it. So she was a nurse instead, and she liked to work. And the parents weren't, Ginny and William weren't especially demonstrative in terms of verbal I love yous. There was physicality. When I spoke with, you know, both Bill and Jan and Marilyn's friends from that time, they described her mom as very austere, very forthright, uh, and but with a beautiful smile. So there was a sense of humor there. And Marilyn's father was, as his son, as Bill described him, the school of silence. He didn't talk very much. He was very, unless he had something to say, he was very conservative in how how he expressed himself. And he was an advertising exec at Monroe Dryer, which was one of the big ad agencies on Madison Avenue. He was a literal madman, like the TV show, and worked on the Avon account. But Marilyn, because both of her parents worked, she, spent time with friends, and especially with her mother, she described their relationship as oil and water. Marilyn always knew she wanted to be an entertainer since she was about 3 years old. And she would put on plays and in the backyard, and of course would write and star and direct them. Um, she recognized her gifts early. Her idol was Anne Margaret. And she would, lip sync in front of the mirror to the soundtrack to Bye Bye Birdie and West Side Story and things like that. And she always knew that that's what she wanted to do. And when she was left to, her parents were working and her brother and sister out of the house, her imagination was sort of set free, and she was able to fantasize about what she wanted to do with her life. And I think, her mom was, I think she and her mom probably had more in common. I think they were more alike, which is probably why they, maybe butted heads. Her mom used to tell her, stop showing off, when she would perform for people. Her dad encouraged it, but she really loved her father very much. And I want to do a brief reading of something that Marilyn herself wrote for GQ magazine in 1987. But she really desperately needed both of her parents, but especially her father's validation and approval. And when he was at Brown, he was he did sports. So she did sports when she was at Westport, or living in Westport, specifically gymnastics and diving, and was even scouted for the '68 Olympic team and all that stuff. She was a junior Olympic gymnast and a junior Olympic diver. And she loved, especially diving, sort of being on that pedestal. And she was always an exhibitionist. And that kind of gave her a thrill. But what she was really doing was seeking the approval of both her mother and her father, and specifically her dad. In one story she told, she won lots of gold medals, and one time she had to do a competition, 6 difficult dives, and she came in second because she said she was just distracted and no one was there in the audience to support her. Her parents weren't there. Her brother and sister were living their own lives at that point, married with children and all that. So she brought the medal home to give to her dad, and all he could say was, "Why didn't you get first place?" And I don't think he said it to be cruel, but it really enraged her and devastated her. But it was kind of a moment of reckoning because she realized no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't, she would never get that sort of validation from her parents and her father. And that didn't stop her from trying, but we all want our parents' approval. We all want to make our parents proud. Um, we don't want to bring shame on the family, all of that stuff. But they were very image conscious people. So you can imagine when she became famous for X-rated films, how they reacted. Um, but I want to do just read something from the book. Marilyn wrote this for GQ magazine in 1987, and she wrote it about her time in Westport and specifically about her dad and her relationship with her dad. Um, I was born and raised in Westport, Connecticut, a suburb for executives who worked in New York City. My name was Marilyn Briggs. I was a cheerleader in high school. My mother worked as a nurse, and my father was an ad exec in New York City. He worked on the Avon account. My parents were not into being affectionate. I craved that, mostly from my dad. He was a handsome man, a silver fox. I had this mad sexual fantasy about him. It really was incest, but it was all right. Sometimes fantasies are okay if you leave them as fantasies. When I was 18, I wrote him this love letter, but he never responded. I was crushed when I learned he had a girlfriend all those years. I was 21 playing the Riverboat Room in New York when he walked in with his girlfriend. It shocked me even then that he wasn't perfect. All my life, I've tried to please my father, but I never could. There's something in me that doesn't please men. I don't know. Maybe that's why I work so hard at it all these years. Maybe that's why I always need a man to take care of me, to be daddy's girl. Sometimes I don't want to think about it. You know, my father is divorced from my mother now. He lives alone in an apartment. He told me for the first time only recently that he has kept my love letter in his dresser drawer all these years. And I know some of that might be shocking to some viewers, but especially the sort of incest fantasy. But what I love about it is just how, you know, that was written for a national magazine, is just how honest she was, how willing she was to be vulnerable in public, how willing she was to express herself um, unapologetically. But it also gives you an idea of the kind of, you know, relationship she had with her parents and especially her dad. And that's something that drove her. She always had a drive to succeed, but that's something that really, you know, crept in there. I don't know that we'll ever have all of the answers for it, but as to why, but that drove her to want to try even harder. That validation and acceptance from her parents. So I want to move to the next slide. So she went to Hills Point Elementary School and was always in school plays. The photo on the left is she's there in the white. That is from a elementary school stage production of Oliver, which I'm sure was just great. And as all elementary school productions are. But she was in all of the plays. Her sister told me, you know, she was the lead in The Sound of Music, and this is when she was like 11 or 12 or something. And she always wanted to sing, to dance, to entertain. And this was 1964, so she was about 12 in this picture, depending on the date, or about to turn 12. And on the right is her Staples High School class of 1970 yearbook photo. And that's probably the people who remember her, who are watching. That's probably the Marilyn they remember the most. When she started puberty and started blossoming, she developed a rare kind of beauty. I mean, she wasn't just pretty or cute. She was beautiful and remained so. And the camera loved her and she loved the camera. And she really was you know, developing her own, becoming aware of her own sexuality and enjoying that and enjoying how she made men feel. She said one time she passed a class because she didn't wear underwear in high school. She was thrown off the cheerleading team for drinking a beer, along with a lot of other people who were drinking. There was sort of one tattletale who told on all of them, and they all got thrown off the cheerleading squad and a couple off the football team. But she, instead of telling her parents that she was drinking beer, she told them that she was thrown off for not wearing underwear, as if she thought that was more chaste, and which is kind of funny. Um, but she had, because of she was so toned from all of the sports, and she was an excellent athlete. She was voted best student body in the class of 70 superlatives. She wanted homecoming queen. She was nominated, but she never got it. But that always kind of stung her for the rest of her life. But she was very well liked. The people I talked to, and I have to say this, who knew her well, her family, her friends, her longtime friends, including those from Westport, um, they loved her deeply. They still do. That was palpable when I was speaking with them, just how much they cared for her and loved her, and still do. And some of them were hesitant to talk to me. They needed a little bit of convincing, I think, because they one, cherish those memories so much, but um, they're protective of her and of her daughter. And I get that. But I'm grateful to those, people who really knew her, who spoke with me, because they, were able to shed a light on a person that people only think they know because she was a celebrity. But she was so much more than that. And however, when she became a celebrity, when she became Marilyn Chambers, she sort of lost her identity along the way, because she and her husband manager at the time invented this character, Marilyn Chambers, and she kind of lost her way a little bit, figuring out who she was, especially when she was done playing that role. Um, but like I said earlier, she would go to her high school reunions every year, and I know Westport has its share of famous residents, um, but she was one of them. And what was, just to sort of address one thing, when writing this book, I realized that uh, she passed in 2009. She's been gone for more than 15 years. That's a really long time for someone who was a celebrity to be out of the public eye. And when writing the book, I realized that I not only had to introduce her to an entire new generation who had never heard of her, but also reintroduce her to a generation that had largely forgotten her. She was a baby boomer, and that's the generation that remembers her the most. But many of them have largely, or had largely, forgotten her, and that's part of why I wrote the book, because I wanted her legacy to be remembered. And so so I just wanted to say that, but we can move to the next slide, because now we'll talk a little bit about what happened when she moved to San Francisco. So she moved to San Francisco. It was about 70, 71. It's a little fuzzy because she told different versions of the story, and the dates didn't quite line up. But she moved to San Francisco in the early 70s after graduating high school. She actually moved to New York first, and did some modeling there. She was not a high fashion runway model. She was a little too wholesome to be that. But she did some stuff for the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Very wholesome. She did Clairol, Pepsi commercials, and very wholesome products. And then we'll talk about one particular product that she did a promotional campaign for. But soon after she married, or soon after she moved to San Francisco, she married a man that you see here. This is actually from the Westport News in 1972. She married a man named Douglas Chapin, and he's the most mysterious man of her life. Not a lot of people remembered him, even those who met him. He was kind of just there. and he was playing bagpipes on the street in San Francisco, and she gave him money. And as she said, he invited her home, and she stayed for 2 years. And they were just, she considered herself a hippie chick. I always think was just slightly more sophisticated than the traditional San Francisco hippies. But and I apologize if you hear the construction outside my window. But she and the first 2 years of their marriage, they were just kind of running around San Francisco like flower children, and they loved it, and it was great. But they were really young. She was only 20 when they married, and 20 or 21 when they married. So she was young, although that generation got married young. I think my mom was 21 or 22 when she married my dad. But anyway, we can move on. But she loved San Francisco. And if you want to go to the next slide, she had been there because in 1969 she got a part in a film called The Owl and the Pussycat, starring Barbara Streisand and George Segal. And it was a bit part, and that's the image that you see on the left. And she had no speaking lines in it. She played comedian Robert Klein's girlfriend, and she was in bed topless, which she always found, she wasn't really topless. They made her wear 2 body stockings to give the illusion of nudity, which she thought was, very hypocritical, because she didn't mind being nude. But she got a role in this film, which was a big hit. And she was asked by the producer, Ray Stark, to do a publicity campaign for the film, her and another actress who had a bit role. And she had no lines. She was credited under a stage name, Evelyn Lang. No one knows where that came from. So she wasn't even credited as Marilyn Briggs. And if you're wondering why a high-powered producer would send an 18-year-old ingenue who was looking to further her career and excited about the entertainment industry, to Hollywood and San Francisco on a major press tour for a film in which she doesn't speak, you could probably guess why, but you'll have to read the book to find out all the reasons. But needless to say, she was disillusioned, and she didn't like LA very much, but she fell in love with San Francisco, and that's where I live. And she just loved everything about it. That was, of course, at the height of the hippie era, and the Summer of Love had happened a couple of years before, and that spoke to her. That really resonated with her, and she just thought it was a beautiful city. So when she moved back to New York, she packed all her things and moved to San Francisco, thinking it was the entertainment capital of the world, which it isn't. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. But like her daughter says, there's a great quote from her daughter in the book, San Francisco was my mother's Hollywood, and it really was. And this was her adopted home, and has honored her as such through the years. But the other picture you see on the left-hand side is a film she did called Together. And some of your viewers might remember it because some of them might have been in it. It was directed by Sean Cunningham, another Westporter, who, of course, went on to do Friday the 13th and Last House on the Left with Wes Craven and all that. And he had asked a bunch of friends and family to be in this sexploitation film called Together. And Marilyn was in it. And apparently, Sean Cunningham hates the film because it's never been formally released. The only version you can find is a German dubbed bootleg, if you know where to look. There is a copy that exists in the British Film Institute, but it's in deep archive, which means you need the director's permission to even view it. Even the staff can't view it. So he apparently loathes the film. I don't know why, but she was in it, and she appeared fully nude, and it was about the sexual revolution, and talked. It was scripted, but it was a pseudo documentary about how young people are embracing the sexual revolution. But she appeared nude and did this beautiful series of. The only good thing about the film is this incredible sequence of dives that she did into a swimming pool. And it was shot in slow motion, and it was really gorgeous. And but the film itself, it doesn't have a lot of merit, but she looks stunning in it, and it actually feels a lot like home movies from that time. And so there might be some people in it who are watching right now who don't even know that they're in it, or people who do remember. So um, try to find it if you can. It does live on the internet somewhere, but only in a German dubbed bootleg. But anyway, I wanted to call that out because that is a Westport made film by Sean Cunningham and his brothers. And from what I understand, Marilyn dated one of his brothers. Um, but San Francisco was her place. And if you move to the next slide, you'll see that she took a photo for Procter and Gamble before she moved to San Francisco. She was selected from hundreds of young models to be the mother on the box, newly released box of Ivory Snow, which was in everybody's laundry room at that time. It's not really a thing anymore, but Ivory soap had been around since the 1800s, late 1800s, and there were various Ivory products. Ivory Snow, the laundry detergent, was specifically marketed towards mothers because it was soft enough to wash a baby's clothes in, as evidenced by the baby on the box. The baby is not Brooke Shields. A lot of people think it's Brooke Shields, but it isn't. And its famous tagline, which had been in use since the 1800s, was 99 and 44 100% pure. And she photographed this, and they told her, the executives, that it would take about 2 years to take the old picture off the box and put the new picture with her on the box. So the new picture, the new box, came out in stores around the same week as her film Behind the Green Door, which was made in San Francisco in 1972. And Behind the Green Door came out in August of that year, which was 2 months after another film was released in New York called Deep Throat. And that's probably the most famous adult film of all time, starring Linda Lovelace. And that started to get a lot of press. Celebrities went to see it. And for a brief shining moment, pornography became respectable. They called it porno chic. And it was shown in regular movie theaters. It was reviewed in the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, and regular newspapers. But at the same time, it was technically illegal to show pornography, and theater owners were being raided by police, local theater owners, and thrown in jail. Sometimes the patrons were thrown in jail. And Behind the Green Door was doing brisk business when it was released, but it wasn't until May of the following year, 1973, that the Ivory Snow story broke. And Marilyn made the film Green Door with a pair of brothers, the Mitchell brothers, Jim and Art Mitchell, who are adult filmmakers based here in San Francisco. And when she told them that she was going to be on the box, which she thought was just, oh, by the way, I'm going to be on this new box, they knew the kind of story they had, and they were very savvy marketers, and they sat on the story for as long as they could because they wanted to make sure that all the boxes were in the store, and that Procter and Gamble could not do a product recall, which is very expensive. So they waited as long as they could, and then finally the story broke, and Marilyn Chambers, that name became famous virtually overnight. I know that gets thrown around, famous overnight, but it really was. And it wasn't just in the States. This was an international scandal that this symbol of young American motherhood could also be joyously expressing herself on screen. And of course, this was, right during the women's movement, the gay rights movement, during the sexual revolution, and Marilyn was there at the center of it. And for a couple of years, she, porn was discussed freely and openly on and joked about, and on late night talk shows and things like that. So her performance in it, I mean, even Roger Ebert reviewed it, and I don't know if anyone, probably a lot of people may have seen it. I don't know if they've seen it in a while, but if you haven't, I encourage you to check it out because it's bizarre. It's not like an X-rated film you see today. It's there's a mime act in the middle of it. Um, it's got a really kind of spooky soundtrack. Um, and it's just a weird movie. Uh, she was only 19 when she did it. And she doesn't speak a line of dialogue. It's all, and there are a lot of close-ups. A lot of people think pornography is just, close-ups of um, body parts. But this really focuses on people's faces, their expressions, her eyes. Um, as she would say, it wasn't shot from a gynecologist's point of view. And, she it really transformed. It was part of New Hollywood and transformed what people thought about sex in film. And for a while, those filmmakers, like the Mitchell brothers, thought that this was going to be the next thing, that Hollywood films were going to incorporate hardcore sex into their plots. Didn't quite work out that way, because America was founded on puritanical values, and those run deep. So it was a fad for a while, but out of all of the X-rated stars who came from that era, Linda Lovelace, of course, is famous, but she became famous for different reasons. She tried to parlay her success into mainstream fame and failed. But Marilyn was the only one who was able to do it. And I also want to point out there was no such thing as a porn star before Marilyn Chambers and Linda Lovelace. They gave birth to a whole new strain of celebrity. And for better or worse, I mean, you don't have to like porn, but, and I don't argue in the book for or against pornography. I'll leave that to scholars and sociologists and all that. But there was no such thing as a porn star. She was the first. And that's, whether or not you like it, that's pretty remarkable that a woman could, through an appearance in one film, and give birth to a new kind of celebrity. So if you want to move to the next slide. I just want to, I'm not going to go through all of this in exhaustive detail, but I just want to give some highlights. The clipping you see here is from the Westport News, which local girl swaps swimsuit for showbiz glamour. And Westport, the local papers, this is when local papers existed, and newspapers existed. They covered her fame. A lot of them were very condescending and negative in tone because of the film she made. She made another X-rated film after Green Door called Resurrection of Eve. That was a box office hit, mostly because she was sort of riding the wave from the Ivory Snow scandal, but she wanted to be a mainstream entertainer. And she parted ways with the Mitchell brothers and took up with a man named Chuck Traynor, who was previously married to and managed Linda Lovelace. And he was not a good guy. And that's an understatement. He was very polarizing. You either liked him or you didn't. But what she found in him was an older, I guess, sort of father figure, to manage her career. I don't know that he was really a manager, but he did help sort of polish off the rough edges. And together they developed this character, Marilyn Chambers, a 24-hour-a-day sex goddess, 7 days a week, and she would never break character. She would inhabit the role of Marilyn Chambers for a good 10 years. And that's kind of where she sort of lost her identity. And she was able, unlike Linda Lovelace and some of the other X-rated stars, male and female, to try to break into the mainstream. She was able to do it. She launched a cabaret show, which played on the East Coast in clubs in Boston and New Jersey, and did a 2-month run in the Empire State Building. They used to have a cabaret lounge in the basement called the Riverboat Room, and she played there to rave reviews. She was critics were very skeptical of her because she was known as a porn star. It's kind of like the thing I can associate it most with today is a reality star. Like when a reality TV star, a real housewife, tries to do a major film or a Broadway show, people are very skeptical about whether or not they can do it if they have any talent. And that's sort of how the press was treating Marilyn at that time. They were very skeptical that um, this woman who had appeared in an X-rated film could do anything more than that, which is really misogynistic, but and very sexist because nearly all the people who wrote about her and interviewed her were men. And she liked being feminine. She liked being, a turn on for men. She got a thrill from that. And as I said before, she was an exhibitionist. So she enjoyed that part of it. But she was a woman and she was a human being and she had feelings and emotions. Um, but she was able to have this successful cabaret act, which then gave way to some dinner theater in Las Vegas, which, you know, wasn't Broadway, but gave her a lot of experience. She was in a run, a 6-month run of Neil Simon's play Last of the Red Hot Lovers. She was in a play called Mine with the Dirty Man that was ran for 52 weeks in Las Vegas, was the longest running play in Las Vegas history. And these were straight dramatic comedy plays. These were not sexual in any way. She appeared, she didn't appear nude. She appeared, with in a bikini and stuff like that, but not naked. And she also released a book, an autobiography, when she was 23, and that was kind of a cash grab, but it sold well. And if you go to the next slide, um, she really, really desperately wanted to be known as a serious actress, and she came close a few times. Success was always that kind of success was always just out of reach, which is really frustrating for me as her biographer to research that, and also the people I talked to. Um, and her daughter and I talk about that a lot, just how she was so close. She had signed to do a picture with Nicholas Ray in 76. He directed Rebel Without a Cause, and Rip Torn was starring. Norman Mailer was supposed to be in it, and that fell through because of tax shelter laws. Um, she did do a horror movie with David Cronenberg, who I interviewed, called Rabid, which was a box office hit and earned her good notices. Now it's a cult film. Um, I always get, when I do events, I always get the Cronenberg fans, a few of them in there. And she did an off-Broadway musical. It was short-lived, called Lay Belly Button, but she did that in 1976. She recorded a disco single, which was a moderate hit. And the biggest, she auditioned for a movie called Hardcore, which was written and directed by Paul Schrader. He wrote the screenplay for Taxi Driver. And she was auditioning for the role of a porn star, which seemed too obvious. It's almost typecasting. But when she went in to do the reading, she did it. And then the casting director told her, "I'm sorry, we can't use you." And she asked why. And he said, "Because we're looking for a porn star type." She thought that was ludicrous and said, "I am a porn star. I'm the biggest porn star there is." And he said, "Yeah, but you're too wholesome." She said, "Yeah, that's why I'm the biggest porn star." And he didn't get it. They were looking for someone who looked cheap and unkempt, and that was their Hollywood's idea of a porn star. And that's sort of the paradox of being Marilyn Chambers. An extraordinary stroke of luck catapulted her to fame, and she became the first porn star. But when she auditioned for the role of a porn star, Hollywood considered her too wholesome to be one. And that's the uphill battle that she fought throughout her entire career. And yet she still remained famous and still had mainstream success. And if we want to go to the next slide, because I want to be mindful of time too. She made a film in 19. She finally said, you know what? If you want a porn star, I'll give you a porn star. So she made a film in 1980 called Insatiable, which was a major hit. It was an even bigger hit on home video, which was a relatively new technology than it was in theaters. And we just screened it in Seattle, which was a lot of fun to watch it in a theater like you used to do, because that was the only way before video to see an X-rated film was to go to a movie theater and sit in a darkened room with a bunch of strangers watching hardcore sex. Um, and if you want to go to the next slide, please. But I want to talk a little bit about her legacy. So despite her controversy, as I said before, she contributed something substantive to American popular culture. She's part of the fabric of American culture. She was at the center of the second major sexual revolution in 20th century America. Whether or not you don't have to abandon your opinion of pornography, whether or not you like it, but it's hard to argue exactly what the fact that she contributed something by appearing in those films. She drove a lot of complex and sometimes uncomfortable conversations about sex, sexuality, femininity, women's rights, censorship, First Amendment rights, civil rights. These are things that we're discussing and debating today. And she was right there at the center of it. And, Westport, in my opinion, um, has not done a service to her by honoring her in any way. I think they still think of her as Westport, sturdy little secret, and frankly, I'm sick of that. San Francisco honored her in 1999 with Marilyn Chambers Day in the city and county of San Francisco. The mayor declared it, and she was a human being. She was a woman. She had feelings and emotions like we all do. She just wanted to succeed and do well. She was, as I said earlier, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a friend, a damn good entertainer, far better than people realize. And above all, her greatest role and her greatest achievement was being a mother. And in spirit, she's now a grandmother. Her daughter has a beautiful daughter of her own. And a lot of people who I think profess to have known Marilyn, especially Westport residents, only know one sliver of her life, or think they know her, but they didn't know her at all. The ones who really knew her, they're the ones I talked to. But she had a prolific 30-year career in entertainment, which for a woman in show business who lived by sexist double standards, that's remarkable that she sustained a career that long. And I hope that people will be open-minded and open-hearted enough to read the book, especially those who went to school with her, knew her during her Westport days, because I would gather that they would learn a lot more about her than they think they know already. So I'll step off my soapbox, no pun intended, and that's it. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook and all those fun places.
Yes. Thank you so much for going through all of that information, Jared. That was fascinating.
Good, I'm glad.
So, of course, we do have some questions. I want to start off with a question. We always ask our authors about this because we're always interested at the museum where and what sources were most valuable for the formation of the book. Obviously, you spoke to many people who
Yep.
knew Marilyn very well, including her daughter.
Mhm.
But what other sources proved invaluable in the creation of the book?
Well, here's the thing about an archive. Most of the archive lives in my closet. I spent years researching just as a fan, as someone who was interested in getting to know this woman and wanting to tell her story. And because, Hollywood keeps very detailed records about budgets and timesheets and all that stuff. And those, if you're doing researching a old Hollywood or, an actress from that era, you can go to the Academy Museum, you can go to museums and libraries in Los Angeles and find those papers. There's no such thing for that in the adult film world, in part because many of them were funded by organized crime and they don't really like a paper trail. So I had to do a lot of the research myself and collect a lot of it myself. There's also a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine who lives in the UK who has an extensive collection of stuff. But Marilyn's daughter, McKenna, she was only 17 when her mom passed. And Marilyn had some memorabilia around the house, but didn't really keep a lot of that stuff. And I get into the book why. There's a reason why she didn't keep it, but she also had a husband manager. I mentioned Chuck Trainer, who kind of she did all the work and he took all the money, type of thing. And so the resources I found most valuable were the ones I collected myself. That's it. There weren't a lot of museums I could go to. There were in San Francisco for sure. The library and other museums here were helpful because she has deep ties to San Francisco. But that's pretty much it.
And it did seem like some of the newspapers, at least for reporting on major events, were helpful. And the films as well, the films that you were able to access.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's another thing is her horror film is readily available, Rabid. Her X-rated films, some of them aren't available. Some of them have been released on DVD. None of them have been released on Blu-ray, but some of them, she even did a soap opera on cable television, a dramatic series. She was the star of it. And the only copy that's known to exist lives in my closet. It's the master tapes and VHS copies that I bought from the producer. And no one has seen those since they aired on cable television in 1982. And that was when cable television was new and needed a lot of content, kind of like the streaming providers need now. They're just pumping out content. Cable television was the same way. And she starred there was nudity and softcore, but she played a sex surrogate. And it was about her relationship with her boyfriend, who was uncomfortable with her job, and her relationships with her patients. And it was a straight dramatic series. And it was very well reviewed and watched, but it only ran for one season. So but yes, her films, and fortunately, because she's of the modern era, she gave so many interviews, both in print, on film, radio, every medium. She gave interviews, and internationally too. She took Insatiable to London and Australia. She took Behind the Green Door to Japan. So she was an international celebrity. And she would talk to anyone, fortunately. So I had a lot of their websites like newspapers.com that fortunately preserve all of those. And I did go to the library for some, and their UC San Francisco has a Bay Area television archive, and I did find some good stuff there too that I had digitized. So so thank you for asking that question, because that jogged my memory.
If anyone has a recording of the cable show, you have a very, very valuable tape.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
One of our audience members would like to know who the baby on Ivory Snow is, if it's not Brooke Shields. Do you know? Does anyone know?
No, I got asked that, I think, last week when I did an event, and no, unfortunately, she auditioned so once they picked her, they had to pick a baby that would look good with her. And so she held, she said, hundreds of screaming, crying babies till they found the right one that looked good with her look. And I don't know. It's not Brooke Shields. That's all I know. I don't know if that person went on to have an illustrious career. You'd think they'd I hope they do. I would love to know who that is, and if they're still around. I doubt that they would remember it, but that's something for their legacy, to be the baby on the most controversial Ivory Snow box.
Well, if the Ivory Snow baby is watching, please please
Please
let us
reach
know.
out.
Yeah. Another question for you, Jared. What kind of feedback have you received about the book, about the content, both locally in Westport, but then also more largely from clearly a very large national and I suspect probably international audience as well.
Yeah, I mean, my publisher is based in the UK,
Mhm.
and they really wanted this book. We found it the right home. American publishers turned it down because of the word porn.
Mhm.
Frankly, publishing is a very old industry, and it's very rooted in that conservative mindedness. Um, but nationally, it's gotten great. It's gotten positive reviews and Kirkus. The most delightful and surreal thing that happened to date is that I got a phone call from John Waters, the director, who told me how much he loved the book, and then mentioned it on Real Time with Bill Maher. That was that was uh, that was surreal and wonderful. And John Waters is a great arbiter of taste, whether you like his films or not. He's very well read. He's an erudite gentleman. He he's got good taste. So, and I don't say it sounds like a humble brag, but I don't say that in a conceited way. But I was very thankful and grateful to him, and it was a delight to talk to him on the phone. Kind of out of the blue. So locally, so glad you asked. So I posted about this event in a Facebook group over the last couple of days, just to let people know, because I know there are people still around who knew Marilyn and remember her fondly, and was met with a lot of hostility from
Mhm.
people. And I'm not quite sure why. A couple of comments were, the classic, "Oh, a porn star is noteworthy?" question mark. And I don't know if it was said that haughty because it was text, but
Mhm. Mhm.
porn star was capitalized as if it was a proper noun. It kind of reminded me of something that Trump would tweet out, like logical capitalization and poor grammar. But you always get those people, who
Mhm.
say, "Oh, a
Mhm.
porn star is noteworthy," and I responded and said, "Why don't you come to the virtual event and you'll probably learn more about her?" And I just got a terse no thank you. But those are the people that I mentioned. I hope they will be open-minded enough and open-hearted enough to read the book and get to know this person. Some of the other local commentary I got were from people who professed to know her. And I don't think they really knew her. And they might have gone to school with her and been friendly with her. Um, one one person said that I am probably building a career off of Marilyn Chambers' fame, which I think is adorable because, first of all, you don't write books to get rich and famous. Second,
No.
I'm not living champagne and caviar dreams. Third, you know, passive aggression and trolling at any age is not a good look.
Mm.
So these people are, probably like Marilyn would be in their 70s, and that's not a good look. But it's those are the people I think, it was, I'm not going to say names, of course, but it was a man who did it. And I wonder too if the men who commented on it, why are you her biographer and who are you? And I'm a stranger to them. I get that. But I think they could say anything they want about me. I don't care. But I wonder first about some of the men, if they lusted after her, probably, if they had a crush on her. Maybe she rejected them. Maybe they weren't man enough for her. I don't know. Um, and maybe some of that hostility is coming out in that way. But a lot of, people said, why are we talking about this now? She's been
Mhm.
dragged through the mud, and we need to talk about her now. We should have talked about her sooner. We should be celebrating her life. This book is not, one person said they were disgusted by the title, and I was like, thank you for the free publicity. But the reason is because I called it pure. I always knew I was going to call that because she was a pure individual She was pure in everything she did. She was honest. She was sincere. She was loving. She was accepting. Uh, Unlike some of the people who commented on my Facebook post in this group. Um, so I find it, I have to laugh at it to some degree. And again, you can say anything you want about me, but I think these people think they're doing Marilyn a favor by, you know, like they're coming to her defense, but what they're actually do is disparaging her legacy by making comments like that. And I find that repugnant, and I'm sick of it. And that makes me angry because she was a human being and a woman, and she contributed something probably far more substantive than those people contributed to society. And that I can feel the passion in me right now just talking about it, because I'm protective of her legacy and her daughter and now her granddaughter. Again, you don't have to like pornography or like what the films that she made, but she was an important figure in popular culture, and it's about time people know that and know the positives as well as the negatives. This book has ups and downs, because that's life. Life has its ups and downs. So I encourage and even challenge the local people who may be watching or even commented, who think they know Marilyn Briggs, aka Marilyn Chambers, to actually read the book and learn about this person that they profess to know so much about. I talked to her real Westport friends. I talked to her family. Maybe they're upset because I didn't talk to them because they didn't really know her. Their names never came up in conversation. And maybe for the last half century, they've been telling people, hey, I knew Marilyn Chambers. I was really good friends with her. And now they might have some explaining to do to people who said, why aren't you interviewed for this book? I thought you knew her really well. And they didn't. So, so that's some of the local commentary I've gotten.
I mean, connecting with family members. I know that you've spoken about speaking and being very close with Marilyn's daughter, as well as clearly the people that she worked with for most of her career. And it seems like those, if you're going to trust any source, maybe a family member, and people who worked with her, as well as her own words, as you've mentioned in these sources that you've seen. Those are so invaluable.
Yeah,
So
I tried to put most of it in her own words. And like I said, fortunately, she gave thousands of interviews in her career. So, and talked about everything. So I really, we're never going to know all of the stories. When she died, she was only 56. It was unexpected. No, porn did not kill her. Drugs did not kill her. Everyone goes to that. It wasn't that. She had an aneurysm related to heart disease. Heart disease, very common for women in that age group. And it was tragic. It was totally unexpected. And so she took with her a lot of stories and a lot of secrets. And I tried to give the best possible version of her that I could. And like I said before, the people who really knew her loved her so much and still do. And I never met her, but I love her. And, and again, feel as her biographer and as her sort of one of her legacy keepers, just protective that, people don't write her off as a porn star. Not every porn star gets an obituary in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, CNN, and all network news coverage when they die. But she did.
True. Absolutely. That's actually a nice segue, Jared. I wonder if you would tell us, just as we sign off, I know we're right at the end of our time, what you hope that readers will take from the book. You've outlined some of her legacies, but what's that key thing that you hope that they will remember?
I hope that they will, I hope they'll realize that she was far more than the label, again, the area of entertainment for which she is best known, that she's far bigger than the porn star label, and that she contributed something to American popular culture, and is a hopefully no more, but a forgotten figure in 20th century popular culture. And as an entertainer and as a woman and as someone who was sex positive, and we're still having those conversations today, I think it's important her story was told. And I hope some of it will resonate with people, because she had ups and downs just like everyone else, regardless of the fact that she was famous. So I hope people will be open-minded enough to learn more about her.
Absolutely. So please, everyone, the book cover is here on the screen. We do encourage you to pick up a copy of Pure: The Sexual Revolutions of Marilyn Chambers and learn a little bit more about a local Westporter. Of course, thank you so much, Jared, for joining us today. On the screen now is Jared's social media handle, so please do follow him and the book, all of its coverage online. And please do pick up a physical copy of the book or a digital copy of the book. Please do. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing. I know you mentioned it, but it's so important to preserve not only, American history, but local history. So Nicole mentioned donating to the Westport Museum for History and Culture. And I will just echo that, because preserving local history is really important. So please consider doing that.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our audience. Thank you for tuning in, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.